Hello and welcome in to another episode of the Fantasy Football Forecast. I'm your host, Trevor Scott, joined by my co-host, Matt Giraldi.
Going on, guys?
And today we're going to go through running backs 21 to 35. So we had kind of promised this video when we dropped 1 through 20. And so we're going to go through the mid-round running backs to talk through everything that we see from this group. So these are our high-end running back threes, right? So we're getting into if you filled out your receivers and you have a couple quarterbacks maybe already, these are the guys you're going to be targeting maybe as your running back twos, ideally. And then if you went a little bit more robust RB, you grabbed a couple guys up early. These are guys that would be flex consideration, but my recommendation would be to probably wait until the next tier rather than grab one of these guys as well, because when you have so many spots you have to fill. It is a little difficult to get in on running backs, or I feel like anyways that I'm behind if I'm in on too many running backs in the top 7 picks. But number 21 here is James Conner.
Yeah, so James Conner, I feel like is just consistently underrated. So since he's arrived in Arizona, he's finished his RB5, RB10, and RB9 in fantasy points per game. The issue with Conner, I guess, is he does have a pretty consistent injury history. He's averaged 4 missed games out of the last 5 years, and now he's 29, coming off the second highest workload of his career. He is a target of mine because he is very dominant on the field, as we saw last year. But I do make a point when I take James Conner to take Trey Benson later in the draft. I think Trey Benson's the type of backup where if Conner does miss time, he's got the talent and athletic profile where he really could be, a solid starter in your lineups. And similar to, what we saw a couple years ago where Rashad Penny went down and Kenneth Walker stepped in a big way. I think that Benson has the talent to do that. But, Conner is definitely a target of mine just based on how solid he's been.
Yeah, and the per game stats are the key here, right? You know that you're not getting 17 games out of James Conner. That is, if you draft James Conner with that as your expectation, you are going to be let down. The idea is that you get a top 10 running back when he plays his 12 games. And the other 5 games you have to fill in, you kind of have to fill in for him. And maybe this year, right, unlike years past, there's actually a handcuff that can probably do the job for you and be in your starting lineup while Connor's down in Trey Benson. So that's a very good strategy, I think, to draft Conner, draft Benson. Benson's somebody you can get in round 11, round 12. And if you want to lock in that Cardinals backfield, that's something that this year, unlike years past, can really help as the Conner owner, so you don't have to be, kind of scrambling for another running back. So
like Amari DiMercato and those guys.
Yeah. Oh God, just so bad. So many bad running backs on Arizona in the past. So I do like Conner. I do like drafting Conner. I'm not a big fan of drafting handcuffs. I like to take as many shots as you can on different situations and try to hit on, whoever the waiver wire guy is going to be, or whoever the late round flyer is going to be that turns into a starter. But with Conner, I might make the exception because he's so good when he plays, and Benson should be so good when he plays as well, because he's, just very high talent profile. So overall, like Conner, and think that this is a situation that is different this year than it has been. So he should hopefully be, a little bit more valuable this year. Number 22 is David Montgomery, and I personally really like Montgomery. I wish I could push him higher. I just feel like his role is going to be such that Gibbs is just going to be limiting his touches this year. He got off to a super hot start because he was getting such massive volume at the beginning of the year. And then Gibbs missed a game and, he got even more volume. He had like a 30-plus point game because he scored multiple touchdowns. So he is still going to get work, right? Obviously, we wouldn't have him at 22 if he wasn't going to be a big-time producer here. But, he's going to work a lot between the 20s. He's going to work a lot in between the tackles, and he still should get the goal line work. I don't think his role in the passing game is going to be very much, if at all. And so that kind of limits his upside here. But week to week, he should be very much involved on the goal line. The Lions offense is really good. So the weeks he does score, you're going to be happy you had him in your lineup. And overall, he's been a solid player anyways for the Lions, and they love him there. So Um,
Y-
yeah,
Yeah,
so I
nothing.
like David Montgomery this year.
Yeah, nothing much to add on top of that. I tend to agree. And Lions have one of, if not the best offensive lines in the NFL, which obviously doesn't hurt.
Yep. And so overall, Montgomery is going to be a good pick. He goes in like round 6 and 7 too, so that's another guy that is your second running back. I think is definitely a solid plug and play there. All right, so number 23, Raheem.
One of the biggest surprises last year finishing as the RB2 on the season. I've been taking him in a lot of mocks and in best ball drafts just because if I'm waiting on running back and I want a guy that I think is pretty solid, I don't know. Like he's got the upside that not a lot of people have at RB23. So what do you think about Mostert?
Yeah, and I like Mostert. I haven't pushed up maybe a little bit higher because he's just somebody that I would actually want from this tier, from this area of the draft, you know? So I pushed him up just because I think I'm going to end up with more of him, and I think he should be going a little bit earlier because there's obviously the chance that the offense is different. Achan is the one, and he's the 1B or the two. But if he's healthy, I expect him to continue to get work. Achan and him were able to kind of coexist last year, and Achan is so efficient and isn't exactly the beacon of health or the biggest running back that they have out there. Mostert is still one of the fastest guys in the league, even though he's the oldest running back in the league. And so, I expect him still to be, getting 15 touches. Maybe he works in the passing game a little bit too, 2 or 3 targets a game. So with that workload on the Dolphins offense, I do think they're going to be frustrating games this year in a way that didn't happen last year, where Achan is getting all the work and, he's got the hot hand and they're riding him. But overall, I think Mostert, again, is somebody who's a very good player, somebody a very talented player, and those are the types of guys I want on my team. Getting into number 24, DeAndre Swift. So this is probably the most difficult running back for me to rank. I recognize that he's a good player. I recognize that he should be in a good situation with a much improved Bears offense. But, he still also will probably be the number 4 in the passing game. So his passing game role might not look that robust at the end of the year, like maybe 40 targets on the season. And then, I'm not sure he's the best runner between the tackles, and if they're not going to give him a ton of work on the ground either, maybe there's a situation here where he just doesn't quite pan out. I don't know. Maybe I'm just sour on him because I had him last year and I thought he was just going to be so good with the Eagles. And then after that Vikings game in week 2, and then he wasn't, and then just continued to let me down. And there are a lot of positive reports out of camp for him specifically, right? That Caleb Williams has been checking it down to him, that he's been having good explosive runs in camp. So, there is a lot of positive news around him, but he's somebody that I'm likely not going to be drafting much of.
Yeah, I'm avoiding Swift to be honest. I think this whole situation of him coming in as a free agent, giving him a decent amount of money, kind of just like smells a little bit like Miles Sanders of last year, where we kind of pushed him up and followed the money and all of these things, and Sanders was just awful. I mean, Swift was running behind the best offensive line in the league last year, and he was kind of mediocre. I mean, he wasn't breaking tackles, he wasn't doing anything, he wasn't really. I don't know. He didn't live up to expectations behind the O line on that offense. So he's someone that I'm just going to be avoiding.
Yeah, and the other problem with him is he doesn't get any goal line work. I don't think they trust his health and his size, and I think they're going to be going somewhere else. Whoever that is, I don't even know who it's going to be. Or they might throw it a lot inside the 5-yard line and on the 1. So we'll see. We'll see how the touchdowns play out, but I do think his touchdown upside's a little capped by the fact that they're not necessarily going to be wanting to play him on the goal line all the time.
Yeah. And
All
Caleb
right, number
does
25, we
run too. I
have,
mean,
yeah, Caleb is mobile, so maybe they do some form of the tush push with him, try and get him in on the 1, and Swift can continue to get vultured. Uh, so number 25, Najee Harris.
oh man. So Najee actually finished as RB20 last year, which isn't awful, but it kind of felt a lot worse. Now, Pittsburgh, their main priority this offseason was improving their offensive line. Their first 2 picks in the draft were O-line. Last year, I think their first round pick was offensive line as well. say what you want about Arthur Smith, but he's good at calling run plays and he wants to run the ball. I think the downside with Najee is I don't really know how the situation between him and Warren is really going to play out. I would expect Najee would get the goal line carries, but there's also this weird world where maybe they just give the ball to like Cordero Patterson or do some weird jet sweeps with the tight ends too. So I don't know. It's a tough one for me to rank, kind of just given the Arthur Smith situation. But I think Najee's a fine pick at 25, but he's not someone that I've been getting at all, to be honest.
Yeah, and again, I think that speaks kind of to the fact that this isn't the range of running back that I'm targeting. Even necessarily with my second running back. These guys are all good as second running backs, don't get me wrong. But I think the value in the draft kind of turns away from these guys outside of maybe David Montgomery. Because I do think, right, that there's not only is there solid standalone value, but if Gibbs did get hurt, there's significant upside with Montgomery. So out of this group, he's kind of the one that, if you get at the right price, feels the best to me. And Najee, it's not somebody I get because I think I'd rather have Warren. And he goes a round or two later, and at cost, I should say, I like Warren better. So Najee should be solid. He's been solid. He really turned it on at the end of last year. I know you say he finished 20th amongst running backs, and people are like, really? Like he was dropped in my league at some point, or like, he was barely startable. And so, there's an element to it too now where Najee's gotten off to slow starts multiple straight years. So I don't know that I necessarily want to deal with that either. And maybe he comes out firing this year. Maybe he's a better player. But overall, I think passing on Najee or trying to wait around, like if he's your top running back on the clock and you have a different position you could go to, trying to wait around to see if you can get him might be the way to approach drafting him. All right, number 7, tier 7. We got our lotto tickets here, right? These are going to be your back end threes. These are going to be guys that you're really starting to either fill out your bench or try and hit on upside here. Or you waited a long time to draft your second running back, and these are the guys that you're going to start trying to stockpile to try and hit on somebody that you can play in your second running back spot. And the first guy is Jonathan Brooks at 26. So I really think that Brooks can take over as the lead back over the second half of the season. I do wish that I pushed him down a little bit because we do have news now that he's going to be out potentially 3 to 4 weeks, and then who knows how ready he's going to be to play, to take over the role. And so I'm starting to sour on him a little bit. I am really excited by the upside. He was obviously a very productive player last year. If he didn't have the ACL injury, he'd be way higher than this. But overall, if you're looking for a running back in this range, that has upside, right? If you're looking for your third running back, maybe you're looking for your fourth running back to try and kind of pull your group together. You have a lot of IR spots in your league, and he's somebody that you can just put straight into an IR spot because the PUP listed players are an IR, and then you open up that roster spot. Those are situations where I think it's good to draft Jonathan Brooks. And he's going to have more upside than anybody in this area when it comes to the second half of the season. You're going into your playoffs, and he's somebody that you could definitely be plugging into your RB2 or into your flex spot at week 8, week 9 if he's starting to take over and really starting to produce.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head with the IR spot too. And I think we did a mock draft maybe a couple weeks ago where I took Jonathan Brooks as my third running back, but it was because I want to say like Derrick Henry and Jahmyr Gibbs or two guys that didn't have question marks at starter, so I could afford to be patient with Brooks. Now in like a hero RB or zero RB where you need someone down here to start immediately. Unfortunately, got to look in a different direction. But like you said, I do like his upside. He could be at the end of the year one of those like top 12 weekly guys if he gets rolling. So worth the risk if you can afford to, but just be smart about it.
Agreed. Number 27, Zach Moss.
Yeah. So Joe Mixon last year, as bad as he was, finished as the RB5 in this offense. They obviously moved on from him, brought in Zach Moss. And Zach Moss was pretty good last year in Indianapolis. I mean, out of shotgun and in 11 personnel, which is what the Bengals love to do. He was ninth in missed tackles, fourth, sixth in yards per carry, 11th in yards after contact. He had like 20 plus explosive runs. He's also good in pass protection. It kind of just seems to check the boxes of what Cincinnati does and what they want to do. Now, I guess what scares me a little bit now is we're getting more reports about Chase Brown kind of emerging. But if I'm looking at the two guys and I'm looking at Zach Moss, and I think that he checks all of these boxes of what they want for him and what he's good at, he's someone that I've been targeting quite a bit and will continue to until I hear more like, okay, he's going to be the 1B or the second string.
Yeah, and I guess you need to hear it more because number 28 is Chase Brown, and that's all that we've heard from camp so far is that Brown is the one and Moss is behind him. Brown's been getting all the first team snaps. I'm very enthusiastic about Chase Brown. I think even last year, you could see the explosion in his game in a way that Joe Mixon just didn't have. And, I was very excited about him. I picked him up last year in a dynasty league with the idea that I was going to keep him because I thought he was going to take over as the starter. So this is also very much confirmation bias for me. If you watch the camp notes from earlier in the week, I was very excited about Brown at the end of the video. So I definitely have pushed Brown way up compared to consensus here. So I obviously am able to get him later, but I'm very enthusiastic about Brown, especially as a second running back. If you do decide in a super flex, in a 3 wide receiver where you're starting 9 position players, right? Again, when you do that, you have to pick and choose your spots. And I really like Brown, so I have no problem picking him as my second running back. And I still get him as my third running back, right? I don't have a problem really getting him a lot. So I'm very enthusiastic on him. I expect his ADP, like you said, right? You're not jumping off the Moss train until you hear it more and more as we get towards the season, but I'm already there. I expect that Brown is going to be taking over and that he's even going to expand on this ranking. I think he's going to continue to get pushed up, and I could see him getting as high as 23 ahead of Mostert here by the time we're drafting. So I'm very excited about Brown.
That's interesting because you and I typically are kind of in opposite boats with guys like this. You typically target the more established veteran that checks these boxes. I'm usually more into like the shiny new toy. And I just can't get there with Chase Brown. I watched every play, early this morning from his last season. And, everyone wants to talk about that one screenplay that he took to the house where it was probably a block in the back. But, he does look explosive. I'm curious to see.
Oh, my God. Discounting is one good play.
Well, maybe the defender either fell down like an idiot or it was a block in the back. But, he's fast. He's faster than Moss. He looks explosive. I don't know how he's going to be in pass protection with a larger sample size, which is their top priority is keeping Joe Burrow healthy, obviously. So I don't know. I'm not going to go there with Chase Brown. And, if he does end up being the one, you're probably going to not snipe him, but take him in our league anyway. So yeah, I don't know. I'm just not buying all the hype right now with them.
Yeah, that's fair. And I'm glad that we kind of disagree on this. I think it fosters a good conversation because like you said last year, Moss was very productive. He stepped in for Jonathan Taylor and he honestly held Jonathan Taylor off the field until he was kind of full go, right, health-wise. And that was something I don't know that I even expected from him. If I had, I would have ended up with him in a lot more spots. But before last year, I don't think Zach Moss was a very good player. I mean, he was on Buffalo with kind of runway with Singletary to have the lead job, and he just never turned in anything. So I'm afraid that we got that 6-game sample size where he was just going off and he was playing really well, and that we're going to kind of go back to seeing the player he had been before that. And that's why I guess I'm not super enthusiastic about Moss. And my opinion on this backfield hasn't really ever changed. I mean, if you want to go back to one of our very first videos was the Bengals preview, I was saying the same stuff back in April. So Again, for me, this is major confirmation bias. So
Oh
that's why I'm
yeah.
glad to have you here to check me on my enthusiasm and make sure that the viewers get the water poured on the fire that I have for Chase Brown. So
Happy to help.
yeah, all right. So let's get into number 29, Jalen Warren.
So another annoying running back battle going on in Pittsburgh. I talked about some of the positives with Najee Harris on the team, and obviously those are the same for Warren. But Warren last year he was much more explosive, and he was first in missed tackles forced per attempt, second in yards after contact per attempt. I do think what I talked about with Arthur Smith, there's this weird kind of game of tug of war where he hates efficiency, but he also hates first round draft picks. So I don't really know what he's going to do with these guys. I think whoever's trending on Twitter that day, he's going to put the opposite guy in, and he's just going to do his best to make fantasy owners' lives miserable. But joking aside, I do think I agree with you that I do want Warren around 2 rounds later in Superflex, just because I'm looking at some of the explosive metrics, and he's a better pass catcher too. But yeah, it'll be interesting to watch this year.
Yeah, and he was RB30 last year, but I mean, he did it on what, 5 less touches a game than Najee, something like
Yeah,
that. So
yeah, it's
if that
crazy.
turns, if that, yeah, and if Arthur Smith turns this even a little bit more into a 60-40, 50-50 split, like Warren is going to excel. And I think that, it's always a little bit of an iffy start sit decision as you're going week to week to be starting a team's running back too. If you're not confident necessarily that they're going to be getting the ball. And Montgomery, I guess you could say, is the two. Mostert, I guess you could say, is the two. But like, that's different than this situation, I think, because those guys are very established players, and Warren is the guy that's still, I feel like, trying to kind of come on and earn more touches and earn more touches. That's kind of always been the thing is with him. It was kind of like early years Tony Pollard. Like, is he going to get more touches eventually? Come on, can you give him
Yeah,
more touches? So I think that if he does get 2-3 more touches a game, that he's going to be um, a much more viable player, right? And he was 30 as he was last year, so having him 29, I don't feel like is that big of a stretch. I think he's earned that. He's an explosive player, and I think it's somebody that you're going to want to hold on to all season too. It's not this is a talented player, so it's not somebody that is going to flame out. I don't think, a la Damian Pierce from last year, right, where we weren't sure and we were drafting the role. So that's why I like having him pushed up a little bit, maybe over consensus. Is just I'm very confident that the player himself is really good, and so if the role does come, that I do expect him to be very productive. All right, number 30, Tony Pollard. Tony Pollard is somebody that I was hoping. I talked about him in the camp notes too in our last video. I was really hoping or thinking or just expected Pollard to come in as the guy that the Titans paid and kind of take over the role. And that unfortunately hasn't really happened. So, I mean, that's reflected with the RB30 ranking. I really thought Pollard was going to be somebody that was going to get, pushed up into that RB20 range, that we're going to hear he was doing really well in camp, that we are going to hear that he was going to maybe split some of that passing game role with Tajay Spears, and that, Spears would be involved, but not taking major work from Pollard. Now, that's the exact opposite of what we're hearing out of camp. Okay, we're hearing that they're co-RB1s, that they're both going to play. And so I'm not sure exactly what that means, because now it seems like Spears was already the passing downs work. So are they just going to split rushing and passing down work? Are they going to split the early down work, and then Spears is going to play on passing downs like he did last year? This situation to me is really murky right now. And this is one that I'm likely just going to be avoiding, because I had such high expectations for Pollard. And now I'm hearing that Spears is going to be taking from Pollard. I'm worried that we get into the season and then Pollard is going to be the guy, and I'm going to end up with drafting Spears, or vice versa, where I'm going to be like, no, I want to stick to my initial thoughts here on Pollard, and Spears ends up being the guy, and then I end up with no running back from this situation. So I'm likely going to just be avoiding the Titans situation.
yeah, and that's exactly what I was going to say. I mean, they project to be a bottom five offense as well, and the way I envision it, and I think I remember the coach saying this maybe a month or so ago, where they kind of view him as very similar players in a way. So I could see where it's like a drive of Pollard and then a drive of Spears. And it's like, okay, if this offense isn't necessarily that great, is it going to be 60 yards for one guy and 55 yards for the other guy? Obviously, they'll score from here and there, but I don't really want to invest an ADP of 30 at a running back position when I can go in a different direction. So I'm out too.
Yeah, and the other thing about the drive by drive, if they do that, right? What if one drive ends in a touchdown? Drive one ends in a touchdown, right? And Pollard scores that touchdown. The second drive goes 3 and out, and that was Spears' drive. And then Pollard goes, and there's another long drive where he's on the field, and then all of a sudden you started Spears,
Yeah.
thinking that he was going to be the guy, and then Pollard has 60 and a touchdown through the first 3 drives, and it's like, well, I don't want to deal with that. Why are we doing this? Like,
and that was kind of one of my
roles.
And that was kind of how it was, or one of my fears with like Jahmyr Gibbs too, because we saw a lot of that at least at the beginning of last year. And Detroit was a much better, more efficient offense with a great offensive line. And Tennessee's offensive line was worst in the league last year. I know they invested a first-round pick in their offensive line, but it's not just magically going to be Detroit's either. So, yeah, I don't really want a piece of it.
Yeah, I agree. So we'll get into Spears here in a second, too. So this tier 8 is basically fingers crossed at this point, right? You're hoping that these guys figure out a way either to expand their role or that they are going to hit on big plays. 31 is one of my favorites, so I'll team up for you.
Yeah, I like Devin Singletary. I think he'll be the workhorse back, and we kind of seen what he is at this point in his career, which is fine. I think he's got a pretty solid floor given his ADP, and if I'm attacking other positions early, he's someone that I'm, pretty focused on. He's got no competition in the backfield, at least to start the year. His backup is Tyrone Tracy, who is like a 6-year player out of, I want to say Purdue or something like that, but he's only been playing running back 1 year. Like, he was a wide receiver before that. So there's not like anyone nipping at his heels. Maybe they bring him on for some passing plays and things like that. But I don't know. I don't think this offense is going to be very good, but I think as a volume play, I think Singletary is totally fine.
Yep, agreed. Obviously not the best situation, right? Bad line. But there's so many vacated targets. He should just get so much volume, and he is a pretty efficient player throughout his career. All right, number 32 is Nick Chubb. I'm not enthusiastic on drafting Chubb. This is probably as low as you're going to see him get ranked, because people are going to see the name and be excited. But after that major knee injury, he's going to start the year on PUP. I know they put out that squatting video of him, but I just don't think that's going to translate to much yet. I mean, it's not necessarily a muscle issue. It's the ligament, the cutting and going back and forth, and the dislocation. It's just, there was so much into that knee, and in the year after for an older running back, I'm afraid that once he's even on the field, he's not going to be extremely productive, and Ford is still going to be spelling him quite a bit. Or he plays the 1B role when he's back, is that Ford is the one that's getting the 18, 16 to 18 touches, and Chubb is the one that fills the role that's like 10 to 12. And that could be a way that they kind of feather him back into the offense over a 4-week stretch type of thing, so if he's out until week 4 or 6 and he's not really going until week 8 or 10, I'm just concerned about drafting a player like that.
I couldn't agree more.
All right, so number 33, Javonte Williams.
Oh God, Javonte. He should be fully recovered from his gruesome injury from a couple years ago, and we saw how good he was as a rookie. But I'm just fading this offense as a whole, and especially the backfield. I think Sean Payton is a little bit weird, and I don't think they're going to score a lot of touchdowns. It seems like they like Jaleel McLaughlin. They drafted Audric Estime. Javonte is on the last year of his deal, and it isn't one of Payton's guys. They won't be in a playoff hunt, so I could see, them leaning into Estime and McLaughlin a little bit more as the year goes on. There's like all these factors that I'm just completely out on. Now, I will say, if I do end up with Javonte, it would be the hope that, he gets traded to a good team should someone's main starter goes down. But as it stands on the Broncos, just no thank you.
Yeah, and I touched on Javonte during the camp notes video too because Stidham was listed as a QB1. And I think if that's the case, I'm a little more interested here at ADP. And I think there's opportunity for some reception upside. And I'm hoping the offense just overall will be a little bit more efficient if it is Stidham. So that's one thing to consider. The other part about Javonte, I do like Javonte quite a bit as a player. Like I was really high on him in his second year. I picked him like in the second round of Superflex League even. So I like him as a player. It's just unfortunate that the Broncos are in the situation they're in, and there was an early camp report that he might be a cut candidate. I think since then that's kind of uh, cooled off quite a bit, right? I mean, he's been taking all the first team reps. They're expecting him to be their starter now, so at least you can put uh, that report to bed, I guess, or have it ease your mind that that's not really the case anymore. But overall, again, this one should be better coming back off the injury, and I still have a little twinge of hope that he can still be good. So, um, fingers crossed there, but it's just a rough situation. All right, so 34, we got Austin Ekeler. What a fall from grace 1 year can make. He was going as the second RB drafted last year, and he just had the high ankle sprain, and it just made him look slow and old, and
Yeah.
it was rough. The offense obviously wasn't that good, and then once Herbert went down, it was just like, oh, this is terrible. And then Keenan was down too, and it's like, oh my gosh, okay, this just isn't. The wheels are falling off so fast that nothing he could have done would have made it any better. So he does go to Washington, and I think that's interesting because it's going to be a rushing quarterback. So the dump offs, I don't think are necessarily going to be there. And he's got Brian Robinson that he's got to compete with, who's going into his third season now and is a goal line threat. And Ekeler, for as good as he's been on the goal line throughout his career, has I don't know that he wants to deal with having Brian Robinson as the goal line threat there. So I just think the overall upside here is just capped in a way that it hasn't been for Ekeler for years at this point. He showed obviously early in his career he could coexist next to Melvin Gordon, but that was with the statue of Philip Rivers. So we'll see what his role even is in the offense, and so I'm hoping that we can expect that he can be okay here, but I wouldn't be drafting him hoping to get a starter.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, as a Chargers fan, just thanks for all the fun memories, but yeah, not interested in him this year.
Yeah. All right, and then 35, we as promised, Tajay Spears.
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of what we talked about with Tony Pollard, just not wanting a whole lot of this backfield. If I do take someone in the backfield, I am going to take Spears and just take the round two discount with him because he did look pretty explosive last year. I mean, he's shown some flashes, and I don't know. I like I said, I'm just not really in on this backfield, including Spears.
Yeah, and it's just really difficult to draft him. I will say he probably has some more reception upside than Pollard, but I also just I can't get over that. I think Pollard is going to be the early down guy. Like I just don't. I don't know. Spears didn't do it at all last year, and so hearing that it's still co RB1s, I have the feeling that Pollard is still expected to be get early down work, and even if Spears kind of takes over as the 1A, it's still going to have Pollard nagging around with like 10 to 12 touches on a bad offense, right? And so
Yeah.
the backfield splitting touches on a bad offense, I think even if even if they are better than expected, we still don't necessarily think there's that much of a ceiling here.
Agree.
All right, and with that, thank you guys so much for watching.